Welcome back, everybody. It's Miss Moore White. We're in part 3, and not hopefully, will be the last part of chapter 11. So, once again, chapter 11 was about the crises and recoveries in Afro-Eurasia between 1300 and 1500. So, let's jump right back in where we left. We left at Spain, and let's start back with Spain. So, dynasty building and reconquest in Spain. Spain faced an arduous journey to state building because of the rivalry among kingdoms and the lack of religious uniformity. So, remembering that Spain is in the Iberian Peninsula. The Iberian Peninsula is super close to North Africa, which is still dominated heavily by Islam. So, once again, the Iberian Peninsula was pushing Islam back into Africa, or pushing it away from the western parts of Europe. So we're going to see they're not going to have religious uniformity. There's also going to be Jewish people there. There's going to be Christians. There's going to be Muslims. All kinds of kingdoms kind of in this area fighting together and not really having any kind of uniformity. But we're going to have a union that's going to help, or a marriage that's going to help to unify the Iberian people, help unify Spain. So the Union of Castile and Aragon, or the marriage of Isabel of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon in 1469. So with that, all right, so we have the wealthy and populated Castile side of Spain. It's going to unite with the Aragons, who are going to have connections with the trading networks. So no matter what part of the world or what part of Spain you're in, whether you're in the small distant towns, some of the more populous areas, you're all going to be under the control of either Isabel's family or Ferdinand's family, but now they're going to be just one family going forward, which helps to unify Spain and bring it together. So they're gonna marry, and their children are they're gonna marry their children. So they're gonna not sell off, but they're gonna marry their children to other very noble families or royal families throughout Europe, including the Habsburgs. And the Habsburg family is going to be the one that's in dominance, I think, from the 1300s all the way until 18 something. So what we're going to see, they're going to push Muslims almost completely out of Iberia. So that Iberian Peninsula that was at one point in time dominated by Islam is now going to be reclaimed by the Spanish and by Portugal, and then eventually we're going to see a pushing away of Islam and a reclaiming of Catholicism. All right, so the last thing that we're going to see, the last kind of strategic victory they're going to have is going to be in Granada. They're going to push those last little bits of Islamic forces or fighters that are already kind of on their way out. So you're not going to lose your kingdom unless you're already starting to decline. That's just how it works in world history. You lose your area when you're weak. And so the Islamic Empire had already lost a lot. They were already weakened. So it made it easier for the Spanish forces to come in and completely eradicate them from the area and push them out. Let's continue. The Inquisition and westward exploration. So at some point in the very near future, that westward exploration is going to change to westward expansion. So after you explore, after you see what's there, well, now we're going to go into a new form of history, where not a new form of history, but a new way of doing things, where it's like, yo, I like this land. Even though this land's not in my continent, I like this land. But anyway, that's going to be in the future. We'll see that coming up very, very soon. So Isabel and Ferdinand are going to attempt to drive out all non-Catholics from Spain. So whenever Islamic area is conquered, they did not force their religion upon their conquered citizens, except for the Safavid Empire. They were a little bit different. But most Islamic empires were not forcing their religion onto their constituents. They were more tolerant. We're going to see that Christianity, they were more intolerant, and they did not allow you to practice your own faith. And that's going to kind of promote, or it's going to lead to the reason why there is so much religious homogeneity, throughout Europe, where most of the people are Christian because you had to be, and it just kind of continued on. The same way in certain other parts of the world, it's Islamic because that's just kind of how it's been. So basically, because they were not tolerant of any other religious groups, we're going to see that Catholicism is going to, and Christianity is going to be the lead or the dominating, prevailing religion in Western Europe, as well as in the Western world, which we consider the Americas. So in 1481, the Inquisition is going to target conversos, or Christian converted Jews and Muslims. So they're going to specifically target those groups because they're trying to eradicate any kind of any religious group that is not Muslim, or that's not Christian, excuse me. So after the fall of Granada in 1492, the monarchs ordered all Jews and some Moors, about 500,000 people, out of Spain. So if you were not originally born there, even if you tried to convert, they're still going to push you out because they're trying to purify their area and remove all of those negative forces, or as the Chinese call them, remove those barbarians out of their areas. So monarchs are going to give their royal support to a Genos, I think so I pronounce it, navigator, Christopher Columbus, who's going to promise them unimaginable wealth. And so here is the beginning of colonization, imperialism, Europeans trying to dominate the world. It all starts to happen with Christopher Columbus. No, he was not the first, but he is definitely the most famous. He was not the first to be in America, because if he was, we would be named Columbusville. But we're named America after Amerigo Vespucci, who he and other people arrived well before Christopher Columbus. But anyway, Columbus. So we're going to see Christopher Columbus. I can have a whole day on some of the horrors and abuses that Christopher Columbus incited against Native Americans in his time period there. Within 5 to 10 years, about 95% of all of the Native Americans that were alive when he was there are going to be killed from disease, from violence, from abuse, from starvation, from any number of horrible things. Christopher Columbus. Anyway, let's go on and move on. It makes me happier. 15th century England and France. So let's leave Spain. Let's go a little bit further north and see what they're doing up there. The struggles of France and England and the successes of the small states. So when we mean small states, these are going to be these small fragmented areas of Europe that we talked about previously that are not going to unify. So how are they going to be successful? How are they going to be dominating? And how are they still around to this day? French victory in the 100 Years' War between 1337 and 1453 against the English started the process of consolidating French power under the House of Valois. I think that's how you pronounce it. I hope so. So we're going to see a unification or a consolidation of that Frank power and really turning into a unified nation or a unified area that is to be respected and I don't want to say feared, but they earn their respect. So now we have this young fighter coming up. Her name is Joan of Arc. So during this time period, women were not allowed on the battlefield. All right, but we're going to see that Joan of Arc is going to be a peasant girl with divine visions who's going to become a symbol of French patriotism. And is going to turn the tide for the war for the French, So we're going to see that Charles VII is going to grant her an army of between 7,000 and 8,000 men. A woman, 7,000, 8,000 men. Woo! So Joan is going to be a young woman in male attire. That's how she's going to originally kind of be able to do what she does. She's going to be found out eventually that she's a woman, but still, they're going to allow her to do what she does. She's going to be a young woman who wears male attire, and she's going to achieve great military victories with brilliance and charisma. Usually most military leaders are going to have some kind of charisma. They're going to be smart. They're going to draw you in some way. And Joan of Arc is no different. So eventually the English are going to capture her and they're going to try her for heresy and they're going to burn her at the stake. So because she was fighting against England, they're not going to like her. They're not going to respect her. They're not going to be like, yo, you are cool with us because you're killing us. So she had to go. Okay. All right, let's go on and move on. English upheaval and the rise of small states. In England, civil war between the houses of Lancaster and York in the War of the Roses led to the House of Tudor seizing the throne in 1485. So this infighting is going to allow a group that's not a part of that infighting to rise up and dominate because one, they have, more men, that's number one, but they probably have more money during this time period because they're not fighting. Anyway, there's a number of reasons why they're able to kind of rise up and take power and end up controlling England for a very long time. So European states were very small. Portugal is going to have 1 million. Spain, 9 million. Compared to the Ottomans, who are going to have about 25 million. Or during this time period, the Ming are going to have about 200 million people. Or the Mughals are going to have about 110 million people. So Europe, small. America, incredibly small. And most of the populations throughout the world are going to be found the further east you go, because they're just a bit more advanced when it comes to agricultural things, trading, interacting, and things like that. So small proved advantageous for the Italian city-states. They're going to develop banking techniques, and merchants are going to enjoy their link into Eastern Mediterranean, and the Renaissance is going to begin. So the Renaissance, that rebirth. But first, the banking. So a lot of these banking techniques, a lot of these good skills, these trusts, these any number of economic terms you want to throw out there, they're going to kind of get refinement in Europe. They're not going to start there. We're going to see a lot of the banks are going to originally start kind of in China because they're doing so much trading. But as they come further west, they're going to do some refinements and make some changes. The Renaissance, we're going to see that's going to be that, as I said, the rebirth. So they're leaving the dark period. And so once again, it's called the Dark Ages because it was controlled predominantly by Muslims in Western Europe. And most of the Muslims are going to be a little bit brown. So take that as you will. So because they're leaving the Dark Ages, now we're going to see this rebirth period. Okay, this rebirth where they're like, hey, wow, this is art. This is oh my goodness, I love it. So we're going to see that's going to be one of the major changes, or the hallmarks is going to be the Renaissance. So let's see what happens next up with the Renaissance in Europe. So let's see. Europe is finally going to get an identity. Everywhere else is kind of shaping and crafting their identity, but now finally we're going to see Europe is going to have an identity, and it's going to help to really fortify its place in the world. So the only little issue with this is that we're going to see that we're going to kind of push away other histories or other arts and kind of devalue them because they're not seen as European, or they're not seen as comparable to Renaissance arts or things like that. So there still is value in cultural native art, even if it isn't done in European stylings. Europe's political and economic revival included the Renaissance, or the cultural achievements in the Italian states, France, the Low Countries, England, and the Holy Roman Empire in the period between 1430 and 1550. The Renaissance broke the church monopoly on knowledge and opened the way for secular forms of learning. So remember that secular is going to be things that are away from the church. So the Renaissance is going to break the monopoly on knowledge. So remember, the printing press is also moving further west during this time period. So before, if you wanted to get your Bible, your knowledge, or your books, stuff like that, it's coming out of the Bible. Most of that's going to be written in Latin. The only people who understand Latin or who read Latin are going to be the clergy people in the church. Now we're going to see that's going to shift as the printing press comes in. We're going to see more books being created in more languages, which is going to increase literacy, which then means that people are going to have access to books that aren't always the Bible, which means that all their knowledge and content and words don't have to come from the clergy people, which means that they are able to then which means that the lay person or the common person is able to kind of break that hold on knowledge that churches had. So now we're going to see more what is the word I'm looking for? We're going to see more of an expansion of knowledge during this time period, expansion of literacy, so on and so forth. Italian Renaissance. Renaissance is about the rebirth, or the new exposure to ancient Greek and Roman knowledge to understand human experience and humanism. So let's go to that. What does that mean? So scholars are now going to realize that the pre-Christian Greek and Romans had developed powerful means of understanding and caring for the body. What? So this so-called knowledge, I guess they thought was lost from them or hidden from them or whatever it was, but they're going to refine it or rediscover it once the Dark Ages is left. All right, so they're going to see, having studied the world directly without the need to square their observations with biblical information, the ancients had much to teach about geography, astronomy, and architecture, and about how to govern states and armies. What? All of this is happening? All right, and so for Renaissance scholars, it was no longer enough to understand Christian doctrine and to concern themselves with the next world. One had to go into the original classic sources in order to understand the human condition. This, in turn, required the learning of languages and history. So much growth and so much had to happen. So instead of they're looking just about, hey, if I do all that I'm supposed to do and I pray and I repent, then I'll go on into heaven. They're like, but hey, what about your human experience you're having right now? How do you correlate what you're seeing right now, even though there's still going to be a focus on the afterlife? But what about right now? What can I do now? So popes, Christian kings, and wealthy merchants funded much of the Renaissance. Art is going to be supported by the government. Art is going to be supported by the religions. It makes them look good. So we have, people like Michelangelo, the Last Supper. It's going to be in your book. So the Last Supper, if you ever go to Paris and see the Last Supper, it is gigantic. It's almost as large as a billboard. It is absolutely massive and huge. But that's going to be one way they're talking or bonding or a mixing of Christianity and of some of these arts. So that's why it's going to be supported. The art's going to be supported by the church because they're depicting things about the church in gigantic and huge, massive scale. It's a huge painting. I saw it one day and I was like, it's huge. Okay. All right, so once again, we're going to see all of this art is going to be funded by these Christian kings, the popes, the wealthy merchants, because when you have more money, you want to show it off. But also when people are doing art about what you are living and doing, it kind of gives you more legitimacy. And a lot of places during this time period are striving for legitimacy, especially after they're coming out of that Black Plague period during just previous to this time period, okay? Or during this time period, excuse me. So Renaissance artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Sandro Botticelli, Michelangelo, and they're going to apply some Greco-Roman techniques to Christian themes, and we'll see that through their different arts. How does European identity shift in the Renaissance? Okay, so the Renaissance is going to spread due to increasing economic prosperity. That's number one. So there's more trading happening, more things being developed. As these places get more unified, they're able to make more money. It's like, hey, I actually have a government structure, a tax structure, a bit of a bureaucracy. Now I can go function in the world. I'm not just one person trading with another person. It's actually structured and supported by a government, which means it's going to thrive more and be more successful. The circulation of literature and art are also going to help with the spread of Renaissance. So once again, that printing press is major because now you're bringing content down to the everyday person, and all kinds of books can be spread, and classics and whatever it is can be spread across the world in all kinds of different languages. So literacy rates increase. Art. We just talked about how art is going to change, how it's going to be supported. And also we're still going to have interstate rivalry. So we had that issue between England and France. It's not going to stop now. We're going to later see issues between the Germanic people in France or between Russia and whoever else. So all of these things are still going to be happening, and they're still going to remain fragmented, but it's going to be a part of, their identity and what happens. During this time period, we're going to see, so before, European women don't really have as much stature or standing. The women during this time period who had the women previous to this time period who had the most standing or I guess respect would be Islamic women living in the Islamic kingdom. But now we're going to see in Europe, they're going to start to kind of offer more women better access to education. They're going to see the value in educating their women. The Republic of Letters, a network of elite cosmopolitan scholars or correspondents interested in gaining knowledge, searching for patrons, or fleeing persecution. So even though a lot of things are going to be supported by the government, supported by the church, supported by wealthy people, there are still going to be people who are going to come out with controversial views, who are going to still be seeking support or seeking knowledge or seeking areas to run to if they run afoul of any of their government structures or religious structures. So we'll see that happening as well. Renaissance ideas of governance. So how are we going to change governance? So once again, whenever there's a major pandemic or people lose their lives, there's usually or typically some sort of shift in governing or how people choose to be governed. Competing ideas for governance. A network of educated men and women who acquired the means to challenge political, clerical, or ascetic authority. So we're going to see now we have a rising of people who are able to actually, hey, I have the content, the knowledge to be like, I don't agree, or I don't like this. Let's see how this is supposed to be. One group, we're going to see the Florentines are going to pioneer a form of civic humanism under which all citizens were devoted to themselves to devote themselves to ensuring liberty, making sure that we're all free, making sure that everything is equitable. Florentine's Machiavelli is going to write the most famous book on politics called The Prince in 1513. It's still a very popular book today on how things are supposed to be run. That political leader is about the political leadership that was about mastering the amoral means of power and statecraft. I don't really care about the people. I care about the state. That is pretty much the function of the prince. It's about the state and not so much about the citizens, because the state is the most important part or the most important piece to everything. And that kind of tells you how a lot of things operate to this day. They'll risk a citizen over the whole entire country because to them, the country or everybody, the country is more important. The Renaissance revolutionized European culture by creating a culture of cosmopolitan critics who sought classical ideas to address the challenges of an expanding world. So these are people who are looking back into ancient world saying, hey, let's look at some of these ancient ideas and see if we can apply them to what is happening today in 2020, 2021, 2022, so on and so forth. But this was back in the 1400s, 1500s. Let's leave Europe and let's go on into the last part, which is going to be into Ming China. We're rapidly coming to an end. So Ming China, the Mongols and Black Death led the way for the Ming Dynasty to emerge. Famine and Black Death devastated China. Some cities like Bai Sali, modern Hebei, experienced a death toll of about 90%. So other areas, 25 to 60% are going to lose their population. But in Ming China, kind of the epicenter of it, 90% in certain areas are going to lose their lives. So that means if there's 10 people in the room, only one of them is going to walk out alive after leaving the Black Plague. The other 9 people are kaput. The Yan Mongol ruler is going to face chaos and dissent. Okay, so would I listen to you if 9 of my friends just died? I don't think you know what you're talking about. So the most prominent or the most aggressive form of resistance that we're going to see is the Red Turban Movement. It's going to be a blend of Buddhism, Taoism, and other philosophies with strict practices involving diet, penitence, and ceremonies in which the sexes freely mixed and wore red headbands. So they're going to kind of come together and unify as a way of just saying, hey, we don't respect you, we don't agree, and we're going to do things our way. Similar to what was happening in Europe, where there's a rise of debauchery and secular, just all kinds of just negative things. People turn away from the church. So in China, they're going to turn away from the government, similar fashion. The Red Turban commander, Zhu Yanzhang, is going to start driving Mongols from China beginning in Nanjing in 1356. So the Mongol Empire is already weakened because of the Black Death. They're losing a lot of people just like every other places. So because they're weakened, and the Red Turban commander is going to rise up and kind of seize that power in that area. So Zhu is going to found the Ming, or that brilliant dynasty, in 1368. So that's about an 8-year time period from when he starts to kind of move them out to when he's able to found the dynasty, the brilliant or the Ming dynasty. So centralization under the Ming. Rulers are going to face formidable challenges of rebuilding cities, restoring respect for rulers, and reconstructing the bureaucracy. So the Mongols came in, those barbarians came in and changed up everything. And then they brought death and destruction. So we're going to see a super revolt against all of those Mongol ways. They're going to see a turning back to the Han Dynasty, a turning back to some of those old ways, a restoring and a rebuilding of the cities that were destroyed by the Mongols. We're going to have more respect for the rulers. So that filial piety, that Confucianism, they're going to re-implement these things into Chinese society, which is why they're called the brilliant. They're bringing back all the things that were kind of missing. And they're going to reconstruct that centralized bureaucracy, re-implement civil service examinations, and bring back all of those hallmarks of China that were there before the Mongol interaction. Let's continue on. Imperial grandeur and kinship. Emperor Zhu, or Hongwu, expansive and martial, is going to build an extravagant capital in Nanjing. Showing your power, showing your dominance. Just like so many other places, their capitals are going to be beautiful, great, very ornate, very decorated, spending lots of money to show your dominance and power. Emperor Yongle, that his name means perpetual happiness. I love that name. He's going to build an even more grandiose and awe-inspiring capital in Beijing. With the Forbidden City, a walled imperial city with boulevards, courtyards, and a palace. And that means that we're going to have places for leisure. That's a level of development for people. So when you have areas in your community or society that are designed for leisure, that is amazing, that is beautiful, and that is reminiscent of what's happening throughout the other parts of Asia, including India, Southeast Asia, so on and so forth. So we're going to see this beautiful capital. So we have one awesome founder. After the founder, then one of the next rulers is going to continue to expand and continue to demonstrate the massiveness or the brilliance of the Ming Empire. Marriage and kinship increased under Ming power. So Zhang Hongwu married the daughter of the red turban rival, Empress Ma. Makes sense. Turn your enemies into your friends and unify. In the same way what's happening in Spain, we have the trading side unifying with the wealthy side, and that helps to just unify the whole entire country or area, region. So Empress Ma became a kinder, gentler face of the Zhu Hongwu regime, So, instead of them just being like, I'm gonna kill you, she was like, I know they're going to kill you, but it's with love. Or I won't say that, maybe much nicer than that as well, or trying to prevent them from killing and stop going to war, and so on and so forth. One more. So building a bureaucracy or rebuilding a bureaucracy. So the first, they're going to sought out to rule through kinship, but soon they're going to establish a merit or a civil service examination based on imperial bureaucracy. They're going to be like, yo, let's try to go back to this nepotism, these bloodlines. But then they're like, whoa, that kind of weakens our society, and it's not what we're known for. Let's get back to the basic, which is civil service examinations, which help to give you people to work or people to work in your government. Emperor Zhang Hongwu is going to implement a highly centralized imperial bureaucracy and administrative network. He's going to install bureaucrats to oversee the manufacturing of porcelain, cotton, and silk as a tax collection. So they're going to monopolize and really create a lot of order with all of these different profit-making areas they have. So porcelain is sought out across the world during this time period. They want it in Europe. It's going to end up in parts of North Africa through the trading routes and so on and so forth. They're going to find ways to really get that in order so they can make as much money as possible. Same thing with cotton, and definitely same thing with their silk, because they're known for their silk. So they're going to reestablish the Confucius civil service examination system. Talked about that already, okay? So they're going to create local village networks to build irrigation and reforestation projects, 1 billion trees. So they're going to have a mission to put out 1 billion trees and to also help with agriculture in this area so they can continue to grow their population and continue in dominance and control, even when there's times where different rivers switch and go different directions, so they're able to kind of offset or stay away from the famines. Bureaucratic hierarchies are going to force all officials to answer to the emperor. So everything goes back to the emperor to dominate and control. The Ming established the most highly centralized government of this period. All right, so one of the most highly organized, highly centralized governments under this time period. Religion under Ming rule. So emperors used community gatherings of rituals to reinforce their image as mediator between the spiritual world of gods and the worldly affairs of the empire. So that mandate of heaven, that divine right, all of those things are going to still maintain no matter who's in power. All right, so that bonding or that fusion between God and the emperor, which means that for religion, let's talk about that. So we're going to see there's going to be some conflict between state-sanctioned cults. There's going to be some conflict between state-sanctioned cults and Buddhists. Some of those government-founded or funded kind of religious organizations or rituals, and the Buddhists who are kind of coming in because of trading and so on and so forth. So we're going to see there's going to be a limited power with the Ming as it comes to some of those conflicts and what they're able to do and not do, which is going to eventually lead to their decline. So residents of Dongyang are going to deliver their funds to the Buddhist monks rather than to Ming magistrates. So who's in power, who's in control, where do my taxes go? There's going to be a split on that. So even though we're seeing a rise of bureaucracy or going back to that stronger centralized bureaucracy, we're going to see that, hey, this is not going to be so in power that they're going to be able to squash or quash all things that are happening. Ming rulership. Religion is going to play a smaller role in the establishing of the Ming dynasties than with the Islamic empires. Well, obviously, the Islamic empires, Islamic, okay. But for the Ming, religion is going to play a much smaller role. Ming are going to create an elaborate system for classifying and controlling its subjects compared to other Afro-Asiatic empires. So most of these Afro-Asiatic empires, are vast. They're multi-ethnic, they're multilingual, they're multi-everything. Well, China has even more people than all those places combined, and they're able to have a more unified and a more organized way of controlling and organizing their subjects. And they, even still to this day, they have over 1 billion people, and they still have a lot of them under very strict and dominant control. Emperor Hongwu appointed village chiefs, village elders, and tax captains in order to manage his empire. So that bureaucracy, and everyone reports directly right back to Emperor Hongwu, but they all kind of filter down from that centralized bureaucratic way. The dynasty created a social hierarchy to maintain people based on age, sex, and kinship. What this also means is that women are going to play an actual role in society. So women's labor is going to remain critical for the village economy, and the government reinforced the gender hierarchy by promoting women's chastity and constructing commemorative arches for widows who honored their husbands by refraining from remarrying. So we're still seeing a separation of men and women in Chinese society, but in certain places, women have the ability to do work and things like that. The Ming are going to stymie threats with outright terror and repression. So how do you keep people, a lot of people, a diverse number of people under control? Put fear in them. That's a good way to make it work. So the empire remained undergoverned because of the immense task for 10 to 15,000 officials managing over 200 million people. It's not possible for 10 to 15,000 people to manage that number of people. But each one has hundreds of thousands that they're responsible for, and that's too many, okay? So Emperor Hongwu's legacy enabled other Ming successors to balance centralizing ambitions with local sources of power. So instead of just having a completely centralized bureaucracy, they're going to say, hey, how can we utilize these local villages to kind of keep order where I, as the emperor, don't have to be directly related to every single thing. I can still keep tabs on things and know what's happening, but I don't have to dominate and run everything, which is going to be part of the reason why the Ming are going to lose their power to the Qing dynasty. So here's a map of Ming China, and you can kind of see the borderlands of it. So right there at the top, the northern part, that's going to be the Great Wall of China. Once again, walls don't work, and you'll see why walls don't work when we see the Qing dynasty, because the Qing is just going to be like, oh, you think that wall is going to hold me back, player? No, not happening. Anyway, so back to the map, though. You guys can see all of the expansive nature or regions that the Ming had control over. And so they're going to have pretty much most of what we now know as modern day China, as well as part of the Korean peninsula and some of the other island nations, okay? Trade under the Ming. Political stability in the 14th century allowed merchants to revive China's preeminence in long-distance trading. So having a stabilized political system is going to allow more trading to happen and continue China's dominance and preeminence in the world during this time period. So once again, China is still the number one at everything, at knowledge, at trading, at business, at politics, at structure, at bureaucracy, at you name it, China is the number one, okay? And so we're going to see them come back and revive that preeminence in long distance trading that had kind of been taken over a little bit by the Islamic empires. So overseas trading is going to be successful and suspicious. This goes back to some of those early Chinese ways where they don't like outsiders. They are not okay with these barbarians. They want to make money off of you. They don't want your ideas to come inside, which means they're going to look at all these traders like, hey, they're a player coming across the Himalayas. I don't know if I trust you. All right, so Chinese port cities are going to flourish as entrepôts for global goods. So those entrepôts, those meeting places, those trading hubs where you replenish your supplies, or you drop off your supplies and get new imports or exports and things like that, China is going to flourish in those. They're going to have a few of them because China is gigantic. They have a fair amount of fluvial rivers that allow for large transportation up and down and throughout China. Hongwu feared contact with the outside world and that it would undermine his rule. So interaction. China wants interaction in some ways and no interaction in others. So Hongwu was going to ban private maritime commerce in 1371, although the enforcement was lax. So he's going to be like, yo, you guys cannot trade with anybody else. Just don't. Okay, if I'm not looking at you, then don't. I can't. Okay, all right. So basically, people know trade is going on. It's still happening, even though he's going to ban this private trade. It's still going to happen because these private industries are going to flourish. There's still going to be public trading happening backed by the government, but the private trading is not going to be as sanctioned or as legal as in other places. But it's still going to happen. So trade surged despite constant friction between the government officials and maritime traders. So the government is trying to control or limit what comes in and out of their countries, which is limiting how much money these maritime traders can make, which is why you have the maritime traders going around the government and still doing their trading, even though the government is like, stop it. So we're going to see these are going to be some of the origins of the falling away of the Ming Empire and the Ming Dynasty. Maritime exploration and aftermath. Emperor Yongg's sponsorship of a series of spectacular expeditions in the early 15th century was an exception to Ming attitudes toward the outside world. So we have one person who's like, yo, let me buck the system. Let me do something a little bit different. Let me actually sponsor some of these explorations to see maybe, I don't think anything's out there, but maybe something is out there. And so the admiral that is going to be given power is going to be Admiral Zheng He. He's going to lead 7 expeditions into the Indian Ocean to establish a trade and tributary relationship. So people giving you gifts so you don't attack them. So we're going to see he's going to establish that kind of relationship throughout the Indian Ocean, which means in some of those island or Southeast Asian nations that China is going to be bigger than, more dominant than. So they're going to once again go in and do more trading in those areas, but also more, what's the word I'm looking for? Extortion. All right. So saying, hey, you give me money and I don't attack you. And Zheng He's ships are going to be 5 times the size of those of Christopher Columbus's. So we don't really hear about Zheng He throughout history too much, even though he had larger voyages that probably yielded more results and who knows. But when it comes to Christopher Columbus, because he discovered the New World and so much changed after he discovered the New World, that's why they considered Christopher Columbus, I guess, a crucial figure in history, even though we know the history books weren't telling the truth in the beginning. So one more time, Zheng He for comparable. So we're looking at comparable. So when we compare Europe's wealth and Europe's technology and Europe's greatness to China. China is the preeminent. China is the number one. China is the greatest during this time period. And we see this little itty bitty boat compared to a ship that's 5 times its size. So that shows you the dominance and the power and the control and the economic increases that China or the Ming Dynasty has over the rest of the world. So let's go on and close it out. So let's look at the voyages of Zheng He. So between 1405 and 1433, so about 28 years, he's going to go on 7 different voyages. And let's look at all of his places. He's going to go up and down the coast of China. He's going to go into Siam towards Thailand. He's going to go down through Sumatra and the Bay of Bengal and India, go all the way into Eastern Africa, into the Arabian Peninsula, so on and so forth. So he's going to bring different trading values and trading goods along with him along the way, and then bring back things from these other places into China. All right, our last one, and then we're going to do our conclusion. So maritime exploration aftermath. Although exotic and glamorous goods delighted the court, they were not everyday commerce, and Ming rulers withdrew imperial support for expensive maritime trade. So it's bringing in a lot of wonderful things, but it's not bringing in things that people need for their everyday lives, because they can function very well in China without these additional things, because they produce everything in China. They don't need anybody else. They're good. All right, so because of that, they see Zheng He's exploration as being very costly and not really bringing anything of everyday use and everyday value. So they're going to withdraw their support for that. And so just as quickly as China starts to explore, China has stopped exploring, because China doesn't need these barbaric ideas from these barbarians. While maritime trade continued without official patronage, so it's still going to happen, not government supported, China's naval powers decline led the way for rivals from Southeast and Southwest Asia. So once again, the Ming are going to decline in their naval authority and their naval power, which means that some of the island nations that they had been, forcing to give tributes to, are going to start to fight back. And the same thing is going to happen above them with the Great Wall. You're going to have the Manchus are going to eventually come on down and come over the Great Wall and actually expand China and make it bigger than the Great Wall. Let's go back to our conclusion, or let's kind of take it back to where we started. So I don't know if you guys know this, but 2 videos ago, we started talking about the Black Plague. I'm telling you, okay? So the Black Death and its devastation transformed the societies of Afro-Eurasia, shaping and transforming new states and empires. Black Death. We're losing between 20 and 60% of the, 25 and 60% of the population. In some places, 90% of the population because of Black Death. So with that, in Europe, places are going to continue to fragment. They're going to be fragmented, stay fragmented forever because of the Black Death. Then other places are going to be more unified, like in the Islamic gunpowder empires. We're going to see the Ottomans, Safavids, and Mughals are going to grow and expand during this time period. But with their growing expansion, it's going to cause a fortification of European boundaries because they don't want to be taken over by Islamic nations or Islamic rulers because they are predominantly Catholic or Christian. Each state is going to develop distinctive traits, innovative ways of rule, and that are often going to be borrowed from their neighbors. So how they rule their people, how their government is structured, all of those things are going to kind of distinctly change. Are they going to have a monarchy? Is it going to be, that's going to be hereditary based? Is it going to be an emperor who, uses civil service examinations to ensure his power? What is it going to look like? Is it going to be where you have a sultan or a shah? What does our government structure look like during this time period when you go around the world? So each one is going to be distinct, and each one, they're going to kind of usually look around, look to your left, hey neighbor, look to your left, hey neighbor, look to your right, hey neighbor. What's on your test? Okay, so you put C for that. You put D. Got it. And that's pretty much how they kind of create their governments and their structures. So we're also going to see states legitimize rule with dynastic marriages. So those European marriages, they're going to see even happening in China as well. We're going to see bonding through marriage. We're going to see this is going to cause European domination where the same family ends up controlling most of Europe for about 400 years because of these dynastic marriages or marriages that create dynasties. State religion is going to also be another way of legitimizing or legitimizing the government. If the government is supported by the religion, then you're usually okay. If the religion is supported by the government, then you're usually okay. So having these things all working together means that your society is thriving. So the Islamic areas do this, Christian areas do this, and we'll eventually see some budding parts of Buddhism that are going to be supported by the state. Hinduism in India or whatever it is, all of these things are going to be supported. Administrative bureaucracy. So another way to legitimize power is to give your government structure. So instead of it just operating kind of all willy-nilly, it's going to have an actual structure where you know who the controlling person is, and you know the path or the governors or the civil service examination, civil workers who are put in place to control these things or to work in the government. And the last part we're going to see is a lot more commercial expansion. So it's going to be state-supported commercial expansion in most areas, but in some places, including in China, we'll see that the government is going to do their own trading while turning a blind eye to what's happening in their own backyard, even though they're not the most supportive of those outsiders. The last thing, the turning point in world history is marked by Europe, motivated by Ottoman conquest. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to read the whole thing because it's the wordy one. The ultimate turning point in world history is marked by Europe, motivated by Ottoman conquest, seeking new trade connections, just as the Chinese decided to turn away from overseas exploration. So this is a big change in world history, a major indication, a major change over time. So in this time period, China is still number one, but we're laying the foundations for Europe to overtake China and eventually be the preeminent or the most dominant region or sphere of the world. So the turning point in world history is marked by Europe, motivated by Ottoman conquest. So the Ottomans are going to take all the way into Eastern Europe. So these Western European Christianized nations are going to say, yo, if we don't get it together, we're not going to be around. We're going to be we're going to be Muslim nations. So because they had that Islamic conquest right at their door, Islamic conquest right at their door, it's going to force them to unify and get their political stuff together quicker because they're under direct threat of the Ottoman Empire. So, and with that, so because they're going to unify, they're going to be seeking new trade connections. They're just discovering that they have worth and wealth and value, and that they can kind of grow these things by manufacturing. And by the way, they're still one of the smaller parts of the world with, compared to India, compared to China. They don't have 200 million people. They have maybe 40, 50 million people in total. So they're going to look out and seek new trade connections that they're going to use along with their political stability to then go into other places. And at the same time, all of this is happening. China is over here like, we don't want barbarians. We don't want outsiders, which eventually is going to lead to their downfall and which helps to with the rise of Europe because other places. So China has the money to do all this exploration. Clearly they have a shit that's 5 times the size of Christopher Columbus's. But they don't have the desire to explore. And because they don't have the desire to explore, it's going to leave them out of a whole world marketplace of colonization, of imperialism, of taking over, of whatever, and eventually leave them vulnerable to the same thing. Colonization, imperialism, being taken over by other places. So either you're the shark or you're the little fish that's going to get eaten. And China starts off as a shark. And we're seeing the formations of as they're starting to shrink and turn into that little fish. And Europe is growing into that fish or that shark, okay? So the best way I can describe it is kind of like if you have a younger sibling who is taller than you. And you're like, whoa, how did you get so tall? Or the reverse of that. If you're the older sibling and you're the shortest and you're looking around like, how did I get the short genes? So that's pretty much how we can compare some of the European sphere and the Chinese sphere. Okay, so that is it. We are done with chapter 11. Took a little bit longer than I expected, but it's all good. We're gonna work this out. You can watch these videos, and y'all definitely got a quiz. So I hope you guys are having a wonderful, awesome day, and I will see you all soon. Have a great one. Bye.